let's start, right?
Let's do it.
Pablo Manríquez, DC correspondent for Latino Rebels. I was going to have you on. I invited you on in September, and you were like, "Oh, I have my birthday coming up. Happy belated, by the
Right.
way."
Thank you so much, Hector.
And in the interim, I became senior editor of Latino Rebels, and so now I work with you on a daily basis. And you are, as our boss said, you are crushing it. And that is not hyperbole, man. You are crushing it. People, like I just said, people, you have people, politicians, scared, but they're not scared at you. Like you said, you're just asking questions that are kind of obvious, but it seems like before you were there, these questions were just got ignored because I guess the other outlets are what you're going to tell me, right? The other outlets don't have reporters there who are looking to ask the same questions that you and Latino Rebels are, right?
Well, I think that there are other outlets that have really great immigration reporters. I think that like the big innovation that we brought to it though is that we have an immigrant covering immigration policy in the Capitol. So it has sort of like a twofold value add, if you will, just one being perspective and the other being authenticity. And the combination of those two things has really we've been blowing up, man. Like
Yeah.
we have been blowing up. Like Latino Rebels has been blowing up as a daily news site. People are going to and finding stories about a range of issues that affect, I mean, immigrant communities. I think that like if there's one, I mean, we do cover Puerto Rico, we cover we cover the Indian American backlog community
I
and
was
things
gonna
like
say,
that,
like,
right?
thanks to you, there's people going to Latino Rebels to read about immigration who aren't Latino, right? Indian. You did a
That's
story
cool.
on
Yeah,
Indians. The
these
Indian.
guys are cool too. Yeah,
We called it a visa backlog, but they keep telling us call it the green card backlog.
the green card backlog. Yeah, and they're
Um,
right. They're
and
right.
they're right, yeah.
Yeah.
And so yeah, now you're bringing people into not only Latino Rebels readership, but into like the immigration discussion. From you're connecting these different communities that really weren't talking, and we've talked about this before, that really weren't talking or coordinating with each other, like the Indian green card backlog people, and now, they're kind of having to join forces with the undocumented people, right? Even though there's a distinction
Well, they
there
should. I
that's
don't know that
important,
they
but
are. Yeah.
you gotta join forces, right?
I mean, there are two different advocacy groups: the documented immigrant backlog and the undocumented immigrant population community, whatever. Like, it's these are two separate policy discussions, and they're led very differently in terms of how they negotiate, right? And I think that a great example of how they're led differently is that the visa backlog community, since very early in the Build Back Better Act negotiations in the Senate, immediately focused in on Senate Majority Whip Dick Durbin, a Democrat from Illinois. And Dick Durbin, since then, to the credit of their vision, because I encountered a few of the people who are stuck in what's called the employment-based visa backlog, where they get a job through a visa through an employer that sponsors them to come here for a variety of reasons, right? So they're working here, but if they lose their job, they have to self-deport in 60 days, right? And it's just crazy. To me, it sounds great. And they're not, another thing that just blows my mind. Let's say they're like really successful, they have a scrupulous employer that is generous and they become really successful. They're not allowed to start a business with the capital that or the money that they make here in the United States. So they're at a huge disadvantage. And I was like, wow, that's a really interesting, segment of the immigration policy discussion that I had never encountered in probably like the 12, 13 years I lived in Washington, following the undocumented immigration policy discussion very closely, right? So one thing led to another, and over the months of asking about this immigrant community's policy position, right? I was able to see how these two sides approached the negotiation. And the visa backlog people, to make a long story short, to bring it back to the beginning
Green card,
this,
green card.
the green card, yes, exactly. The green
They're gonna
card
kill you,
backlog
man.
people.
They're gonna
I
kill
know.
you.
Sorry, guys. No, the green card backlog people, though, they focused on Durbin, whereas the undocumented community largely focused on Kamala Harris, the vice president of the United States. So the undocumented community kind of went to the end of the negotiation and said on the day that the vote hits the floor for Build Back Better, we need Kamala Harris to be our cheat code. And that's not a bad position, right? Like that's actually it's very strategic. But the visa backlog community, by focusing on Durban, we're like, no, we don't trust it to get to the finish line. We're going to get involved in the daily grind with this thing from the very beginning. And that's what they've done. And in many ways, as a reporter, it's been them taking me along for their journey through this policy space. Me with the access to inquire with these key stakeholders, but them with the actual expertise and deep knowledge of decades in this situation that stems from just like a couple of policy areas that that no one has changed for a long time. Like they just they languish the same way that the undocumented languished since the 1986 amnesty under Reagan.
Let's talk about
right?
the distinction real quick, because it's interesting, right? The Latino undocumented people are obviously, they came here with parents who were undocumented. Either they crossed the border illegally, or they came, like my wife, they came on visitor visas, 30 days, and then just overstayed. And this is why the Indians, green card backlog people want to make that distinction, because it is a distinction. It's an important one. They're the kids of green card holders, right?
Yeah, and many that is a
status,
that is
how does
a part
how
of
does
the
their
backlog,
status lapse?
Okay, so as I understand it, let's say like somebody who's in a sponsored employment or education based visa has a kid. The way it works now is when the kid hits 21, they have to self-deport, right? Unless they can find some, visa fix that seems or marriage, right? Like that extends. They could either, I feel like they can either get married and become citizens, or become like legalized that way, like fully legalized, because these are legal immigrants at the end of the day. Like they came through a customs checkpoint with a permission document from the United States government saying that they're allowed to be in the United States under certain conditions or for a certain period of time. And in the case of these visa backlog youth, or green card backlog youth. I did it again. Sorry.
Sorry, guys. You, bro. This is the last time. Everybody, this is the last time we're going to see Pablo Manríquez. He's going to be killed by a bunch of green card backlog people.
But these youth, though, right? When they hit 21, they have to, I guess, self-deport or find another way to stay here. A lot of them. I was talking to one the other day, a Latina actually, who's in this, because it's not all Indian people who are in these green card backlogs. There's a lot of Mexicans. She was actually from Colombia, and she told me that she was able to stay over that 21-year mark by staying in school, but it wasn't necessarily something that she wanted to do, right? Like she didn't want to get a master's degree. It was just like she also didn't want to go back to Colombia, So there are Latinos involved in this that are affected by the green card backlog. And there was actually there's a group called and there are two big, I think, stakeholders, or there are a lot of stakeholders, there are millions of stakeholders, but with the 1.31 million people in the green card backlog plus their loved ones and stuff like that, because we often talk about just the immigrants who need an amnesty or a visa or whatever, or a green card, but that's the number. It's like 11 million people will be affected. But we know, Hector, like you and I know, like it's not just the people who get to stay here or have to leave. It's everyone they know here, right? Like there are tens of millions of people,
or mixed families, like, which is another thing Latino Rebels shines a light on, is that these mixed families, and I'm part of one, or at least on my in-laws, right? Like now my wife is she's a citizen. She was a dreamer when I met her. Now she's a citizen, fixed her own papers. People are like, did you get a lawyer? She never got a lawyer. And she's really good at paperwork, but she still got family in her immediate family and in extended who, let's just say that it keeps her eye on immigration, because just because you have papers doesn't mean your brother, sister, your parents, your aunt, uncle, somebody especially in Latino communities, immigrant communities. If you have papers, you care about immigration because you still know somebody. You know somebody either in your friends, family, your community, whatever, right?
Yeah, and I think it's Pew Research. I know that when I was writer for Fox News Latino, a vertical that they had for a while that covered the Latino community.
I remember that. What happened to that?
I mean, it went down with the leadership change, if you will, when Roger Ailes got fired. But like the polling that they did at the time, one of the interesting data points out of it was that something was like 85, 86% of Latinos or higher knew of an undocumented immigrant. Like they were I don't remember how it was actually phrased, but like it was an indicator that like the overwhelming majority of Latinos know undocumented people, right, personally in their lives, right? But white people, very few, right? Like non-Latinos, it was a lot less, right? Like so I think that like the I don't know where exactly I'm going with this, but
Happens all the time in this show. But
but
just
yeah,
like
no, it's something that definitely affects our community, and I think like just to kind
the
of bookend
11
the
million
point,
is undocumented, right? But like that there's multiples of that who are affected by this
right.
issue.
And in terms of Latino rebels, in terms of what we're doing, it's also like an audience potential literally in the hundreds of millions, like over time, if we keep doing what we're doing well. And because right now it's like we have like a huge audience of India, of stands from who are immigrants from India who have, basically walked us through their struggle, and we've been able to execute policy reporting through it, through their it's in many ways like collaborations, but the collaboration between journalist and source, right? Like,
Yeah.
so, but
It's how big is Twitter for you as a source, like as a journalist? It seems like there's a lot of, especially on your Twitter, there's a lot of like back and forth and discussions and tweets that end up being parts of stories, right? You're doing the hard. People are talking, singing your praises that you're doing the real legwork. You're showing up to the Capitol. You're in the hallways. You told me that being a DC reporter is all about geography, right? Explain that.
Yeah, so Twitter is important. I like to bottleneck everything into my cell phone number. So 202-738-0059, text first. Like, I mean, like I like to communicate with people I can hear them, I guess I don't know if I'm old school like that or if it's just like, but obviously when I'm reporting, I want it in writing if possible.
Right.
But on Twitter, it's just sort of like, I think that's less like the place where necessarily I'm getting my scoops from or whatever. But it's more like that's where our scoops are becoming famous, like Twitter is, we've been able to join the discussion of really, really excellent reporters who cover the Capitol every day. And they've been instrumental to helping us establish this new beat there. Now, there was some reluctance at the beginning. I know our audience is very aware of what went down earlier this year when we had to return to the press gallery to cover the Congress. But, water under the bridge, we're crushing it, and everybody's pretty much everybody's really nice to us, like, what I mean, for the most part, right? Like there any of the issues that like in the bumps in the road or the callous like places that might have resulted from like our arrival in the Capitol have since seemed to seemingly been paved over. Everybody's awesome, everybody's great. So we and we also have been able to be an incredible resource for the journalists there who have no idea what they're talking about sometimes when it comes to immigration policy. And humbly, like, they come to us, and humbly we go to them, right, for guidance on things that we don't necessarily know about, like the procedures in a certain chamber, or lawmakers who aren't Latino and involved in immigration but are suddenly popping off about immigrants, like who, like that type of guidance is essential to like our ability to rise in the beat quickly, and in essence translate and report the happenings of the Capitol as accurately as we can, and in the actual editorial foci that we like, that we think are the most important for immigrants, right? And that has been the key innovation. I think that like immigration reporting in DC before us mostly focused on enforcement. So DHS numbers, border apprehensions, these things become like, it's like fuel to the fire of the right-wing machine, right? Like, it's like, here's how many immigrants we caught at the border, and this is a huge problem. Oh my God, we need more money, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of like what the entire policy discussion has been. And not necessarily due to reporter negligence. Also, when Republicans are in control, there's always an assumption that Republicans are never going to be on board with any sort of amnesty, right? Or any sort of, relief for immigrants. The visa backlog community, however, the green card backlog community, however, has shown us, right, that there is actually some ways of working with Republicans for immigrant relief. Mike Lee and Chuck, I actually talked to Chuck Grassley about how he helped Mike Lee like find a compromise that would have helped the Indian green card backlog community in the last Congress, right, when Republicans were in control. But it was scuttled and by a lot of different stakeholders were just like, heck no, we're not going to give these visa green card backlog immigrants any relief, right? Because undocumented immigrants are not going to get any relief. And undocumented immigrants are much more numerous and louder and more politically active, and they really mobilize well in certain states, especially swing states like Arizona, right? They can really change the face of elections across the United States moving forward, because there are more and more Latinos, immigrants, and most of the undocumented community at the end of the day is Latinos, right? Most of the green card backlog community is Indians and Chinese people, right? And these two groups, I think, have really been successfully played against each other, right? For scraps at the larger policy table.
That's old, right? I mean, skilled
right.
labor versus unskilled labor, right? That's old.
But it's like the thing is, like, when I look at a farm worker, though, like in the field, right? The United Farm Workers Twitter handle, they have posted a lot of videos of these people picking onions and hauling apples and things like that, right? And that is such highly skilled labor at the end of the day, right? Like, it's like that is,
I agree, but
really,
I'm saying, like, what
really hard work, but it's also precise work because they're going to turn over the land. They understand the whole process from end to end, right? So yeah, when the Indian backlog community starts talking about how they're skilled and legal immigrants, of course it pisses off the undocumented, quote, illegal immigrant community, right? Because they feel that they've been talked down to. My thing is, at the end of the day, though, and I've been saying this since Obama got elected, was like, leave the identity politics and the semantics aside, and go for specifically amnesty, right? Like, Ronald Reagan united an evangelical coalition, a Judeo-Christian coalition, a faith-based coalition around an amnesty back in the day, right? Yeah. He called it an amnesty. This is what it was. They ceded the word amnesty afterwards because there wasn't, according to some, and maybe the case, and sufficient enforcement mechanism for deterring foot traffic across the border or overstays, like visa overstays, without consequences, right? It's just sort of like, of course, it's just kind of porous, right? So as more and more people came here throughout the Maria Hinojosa's book is like masterfully like lays out how the policy context of this went down, like step by step by step. The book is Once I Was You, and step by step, she lays out how immigrant reform and immigrant relief efforts have died since the Reagan amnesty push that succeeded at the beginning of her career as a reporter, right? So now Latino Rebels, through her company, Futuro Media, has arrived at a place in the immigration discussion where we have daily conversations, right? For the first time ever, like daily conversations about the immigration beat with leadership, right? Not with the Hispanic caucus necessarily, not even necessarily with like the chairs of the relevant committees that
or
sort of oversee ICE, like Jerry Nadler, Benny Thompson, but Charles Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, Dick Durbin, right? And when for Republicans take power, we'll talk to them every day too, right? Yeah. Like, we are looking for an update every single day on immigrant relief that has been promised, that now has a paper trail of proposals and a procedure, a process, like a Senate process and a House process that is coming together into a bill. And for me, as someone who's relatively new to the beat, having covered this Build Back Better Act in the case of this bill right now, since it was introduced, because when we got our press pass back, right, the day I get back into the Capitol, Bernie Sanders and Joe Manchin are coming out of a budget committee meeting together saying they have an agreement, right, on a $3.5 trillion spending package. And I think it was Steve Dennis at Bloomberg, an amazing guy, awesome reporter. He does a Zillow, a Friday night Zillow like listings. He finds the most ornate Zillow listings and just posts about them. It's great stuff. But he asked Manchin,
a lot of people do that, right?
I don't know. I love his. I follow his like a hawk, and he followed Manchin like a hawk that day when he asked, well, what about immigration reform? Like, and I think it was him because he tweeted about it. Maybe it wasn't him who asked, but Manchin told Dennis, who tweeted, yeah, I favor immigration reform. I'm sitting at home and I'm like, well, I'm going to go back tomorrow and I'm going to ask everybody if they agree with Manchin, and I did. Everybody in the Democratic caucus. Well, Senator, do you agree with Joe Manchin that immigration reform should be included in the budget reconciliation? And everyone said yes, if the parliamentarian says it's okay. Right.
Well, and I don't want to get too much in the weeds about this because, if anybody wants to follow what the immigration and what you do, Latino Rebels, Pablo Reports on Twitter is it's all there. But like you said, I think you said that, I don't even see, I forgot what I was about to say. What were you saying?
Saturday, man.
Yeah.
Well, I would just say that within the context of this conversation, we had the story cornered really early. If we hadn't been there asking every single day for updates about immigration, there is the question of whether or not we would still be talking about immigrant relief now, right?
Right.
Because God love them. They're actually much better immigration reporters than I am and maybe will ever be. But the Spanish language reporters in Washington who work for broadcasters like Univision, Telemundo, and so on, they don't come into the Senate tunnels, right? They're not allowed to bring their cameras down there into the Senate tunnels, but they could take their phone and just start getting an update from the people who matter, right? Instead of having to lure them out to into a camera, and again, not to get into their production or whatever, there are ways you can use audio that you capture on your phone because you're allowed to use your phone in a Senate tunnel to get somebody specific, then present them in video form. So I think that there are innovations that could go on there, but it gets super, and one of the things I say would be similar, it comes when there's a relief measure passed, at least here in Washington, the local Entravision channel and the amazing anchor Sisiki Felix, she explains people in detail what is going to be on the document that you have to fill out to receive this consideration from the government or from whatever, right? They're incredibly good at that. So I think that if they work the tunnels more, given that they already explained the immigration policy changes, outside of the building at a very granular level for immigrant audiences that would benefit from knowing more about that as a public service, in essence, if they come into the tunnel and just audio track, Senator, can I get an update on the parliament? When is the parliamentarian pitch going? When is this happening? Right. I think that the immigrant audience is going to respond. The obsession that people who are treated unequally in the immigrant, who are the second class, they're cast beneath the citizen, the green card backlog, the undocumented communities, they are in many ways obsessed, obvious as they should be, right, with what is being done to get them equality, right? And that's a vein of coverage that we've been definitely able to tap, and that if I would welcome all 30, 40 professionals who work at these Spanish language broadcasters in Washington, D.C. to join me in the tunnels every day. We'll form a gaggle around every lawmaker who owes the immigrant community that helped them get elected answers, or the immigrant community who is experiencing federalists kicking in their door and taking them in the night and removing them from the country in chains, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, these are answers that have never come out of Congress, man, never come out of Congress. I've been here 13 years, and every once in a while you get half an answer out of Congress. We get half answers every day. Every once in a while we get a whole answer.
Well, that's why that's really what I wanted to bring you on this podcast for is your background. Like you said, now finally there's an immigrant covering. What's your background? I mean, what is your background? Where does this all come from, Pablo?
There are two immigrations that happened in my family background. That's in the memory, my family's memory, of immigration begins with the immigration from Ireland to the United States at the end of the 20th century, right? So 1880 to 1920, the 19th century. Sorry, yeah, from 1880 to 1920, a group of Irish came over from counties Kerry and Cork, right? Sullivans, Clarks, Dorgans, Gainers, right? And they made my mother over the course of a couple of generations, right? And my mother was born in St. Louis, Missouri, right? And she is tougher than anybody I know. white as a ghost, right? Irish woman from Missouri, right? My uncles, her brothers, are both really, really great journalists, one of whom covered the Capitol and the White House the way I am now for about
Wow.
20 years,
Dude,
for I think 19 years for the Memphis paper called the Commercial Appeal. I'm sorry, it was a 20-year like span, but for two different outlets. So it was like the Memphis Commercial Appeal, and then eventually the Scripps Howard News Network. And he was known at the time and to this day as the fastest breaking news reporter. Like he was just brilliant writer.
what's your mom's maiden name?
Sullivan.
Sullivan.
Yeah. And he's Bartholomew Sullivan. And my uncle Christopher Sullivan, right, was first a reporter, and then, sort of worked his way up from, I think, the Farmington, Missouri desk of the Associated Press in like the 70s, right, through Atlanta in the 1990s, where he covered through Baltimore first, and then Atlanta in the 1990s, where he covered like the Olympics and all these other big things that happened in Atlanta, to the New York headquarters of the Associated Press, right, where he retired a deputy editor after 40 years on the job, right, like 40 years at the Associated Press. It's so I have journalism in my background.
Well, that's crazy. I mean, that's such a running theme. Anybody who audiences of the show, followers of the show, like, it's always a theme that, like, I ask somebody, how did you become, what you do now? And when they were a kid, they saw somebody doing what they eventually ended up doing.
Well, the other side of me, though, is a immigrant from what's called El Barrio Bajo in Santiago de Chile, which means the hood in the capital city of Chile, which is the longest country in the world, north to south. It has every climactic zone.
And that's
but
crazy
that
Chile has an Irish connection. That O'Brien, right? General O'Brien? General O something, yeah. In the Chilean independence, help free into Chile from
Bernardo O'Higgins.
O'Higgins.
Yeah, Bernardo O'Higgins, el Libertador. Like, and the main street through Santiago is called Libertador Bernardo O'Higgins. It's called La Alameda, is for short, right? But my grandfather, this is the earliest I know of my family's side, and on like, he was an orphan who, on the outskirts of what was now the hood in Santiago, right? As we understand it, came from a farm out there, right? He didn't have a mother. He was raised by a grandmother who died when he was a boy, basically 10, 11 years old. And he got sent to an orphanage where they taught him how to make shoes. So he was like a shoemaker, right? And when Allende came to power in the 70s as the socialist candidate from Chile, promising that the factory people who made shoes and other products that were for domestic and export, they would have a bigger share, they would have an ownership share in what they were doing. And so los Manríquez somos como we are very political people. My mother's side of the family being a Midwestern Republican, sort of greatest generationers, served in World War II, like had a lot of good things to say about Henry Kissinger. My father's side of the family, the consequence of Henry Kissinger when Allende was assassinated. Right? Well, but the consequence of Henry Kissinger when Allende was assassinated and Pinochet was installed. So my mother went to Notre Dame for college in St. Louis, while my father fought the dictatorship in Santiago. And these are
Have you ever heard your parents talk about Kissinger?
Oh yeah, my mother thinks Henry Kissinger is the worst. I mean, I'm not going to speak for my mother, but she hates Henry Kissinger. She observed what the dictatorship was as a green guy in Santiago who met my father and had me, right?
Right.
So it's like there's
what was she doing in Chile?
So she's after college in Romance languages at the University of Notre Dame. She studied abroad. Or she didn't study abroad. She got a like a fellowship type thing to teach at a school for underprivileged kids that is in the neighborhood where my father grew up, right? My father was like the first in his neighborhood to go to get an associate's degree so he could be a teacher. And so he was kind of like a neighborhood legend in that sense, right? Like the one who made it up, and now he's a teacher. That was like a big deal, right?
Right.
And so when my mother got down there, she found this like dashing, smart coworker, and they went down to Patagonia. And my grandmother, mi abuelita, me dice que I was conceived at the foot of the volcano Osorno. Like that's like she's like that's because when they came back, that was my mother was pregnant when they came back from the hiking trip, right? And
That's
she's like the one who remembers
crazy.
because she was just like, she's es una abuelita como sabe de todo, man.
Right, exactly.
And
Isn't it crazy? Yeah, grandmas know like when you're pregnant and when you got pregnant and how it happened.
yeah, well, I mean, like they were living with my grandmother at the time, like because it's it's sort of like a blockhouse in the hood. And so she knew everything, and she always knows everything. So she's the ultimate source on like what happened like immediately before and immediately after I was born, right? So I guess she remembers the details, like the day that they took me to the La Clínica en Nuñoa so I could be born, right? The doctor was a trainee when they had gone in for like a checkup, and he was being observed by another doctor, and that was his first solo shift. Right.
Wow.
So it's just like, and I was born a C-section. So it was a complicated birth. Right. And so I know I have all these cool details and stuff like that from La Abuelita, que lo sabe todo. She's my only living grandparent left. Right. And I've known maybe two geniuses, maybe three in my life. People always say like truly geniuses. And she's one of them. Like she is the ultimate merchant, survivor, and wit, like in the neighborhood, in the subaltern reaches of Santiago, that any intern ever, like the people. I actually did an internship type thing in Santiago when I was in college, and they sent me uptown to work at like a PR firm. I would tell them about Pudahuel, and they were just like, why would you go there last weekend? That's like the most dangerous place ever. But it's home to my father, right? So there's these two, like there's privilege and immigrant, right? White immigrant, mind you, because Chilenos, for the most part, in those days were white, were light skinned, right?
Right.
Nowadays, a lot more obviously Haitians, Colombians, and I think it's great because Chile has a very isolated culture. It's a very isolated nation, and the culture I think is in being enriched. And there's also like a lot of tensions as like a different subaltern like takes hold in some of these neighborhoods. But in the one where my father grew up, he and my uncles were known as the protesters who squared off against the dictatorship, were detained and tortured numerous times, and eventually exiled my father to the United States with my mother.
Your dad was tortured?
Yeah, 4 different times.
What does he tell you about that?
Beginning at 13.
Is he still with us?
Yeah. He's got the scars though, it's a story. Again, it's like journalistically, I've been covering this my whole life.
Yeah.
I just now I'm reporting the news in the capital, right? I have the details. When
did you come from Chile? How old were you?
I was 10 months old. That's another thing. If I ever write a memoir, right, I think the title should be Barely an Immigrant, right? Because I was literally a baby when I arrived in Miami.
My sister-in-law was like 10 months, 11 months when she came from Juarez. Yeah.
But immigrant still.
She was undocumented until about a few years ago. So she was undocumented for like almost 30 years.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it?
It is. So what about you, man?
No. Well, my mom's from Honduras. My dad's Puerto Rican from Chicago. But that's pretty much it. My grandma sounds like yours. She's the only living one. When she was raised under a dictatorship in Honduras, and when she was a kid, she had no shoes. She would play with rocks as dolls. Like she would name them and have like play with them.
Wow.
And now she's been all around the world. She's been all around the world. She's been to every country: Morocco, Israel, 20 times. Been all over Europe. She had her own store in Chicago. She sounds like merchant, right? Survivor, like you said. She's really savvy in a way that I'm still learning how to be. But so how do you get into so you moved from Chile to where?
At
Where'd
10
you
months
grow
old.
up?
I grew up in O'Fallon, Missouri. It's a exurb of St. Louis, which at the time when I arrived there was sort of like a small off the highway network of neighborhoods that had been recently built. A lot of them were sort of trailer parks and like 1 and 2 bedroom homes off the highway, right? that the people who lived there mostly worked in either the manufacturing sector. Very like one of the largest employers in the area makes most of the refrigeration units that you'll find anywhere in the world, right? In grocery stores. So it's called True Manufacturing, and that's a big employer, right? But so I arrived there as a kid. By the time I got to college, it had really been developed right into sort of McMansion labyrinths that over what used to be cornfields. So I, as like an OG resident of the town through high school, right? Somebody who kind of grown up there. My mother's education at Notre Dame was a North Star
Right.
that I followed. I had grown up on her stories about studying abroad in France and said, man, someday I'm going to go see castles. Like as a little kid, it was just like in my mind, I was just like, this is how I'm going to see like actual castles. Right. So, but that guided me to the University of Notre Dame, where when I got in, I looked at sort of like the list of things that I could study. Right. And most of the words most of the courses I had no background in, right? Like, engineering or philosophy or theology. Like these are words that I would actually have to go look up in a paper dictionary because it was like mostly before the internet. Like, what is theology, right?
Yeah. Right.
But the two that I recognized right away was political science and history. I was like, yeah, my father, very political. My grandfather also very political and very opposing political forces, right? So I had that, like, it interested me. It piqued my interest as
I
like
would
a
say
little
that
kid.
Chileans are so, as a culture, politically savvy. Like they just understand. Politics is more part of a Chilean's life than anybody. Like I have a friend in Chile right now. He's an English professor at the University of Santiago, and like, whenever I talk to him about hey, tell me what's going on in Chile, and he'll give you a rundown of all the players and all the groups and what's the in a way that you can't ask an American what's about American politics, but you ask a Chilean about Chilean politics, and they'll give you a fucking workshop.
It's true. And I think it's that's like a function of like a small country with a lot of political parties. So if you want to actually like talk politics, you actually have to know like a lot of different people and figure. Here it's almost like few people pay attention, but the ones who do know their local congressman. They might know a caucus or something more than they might know a few caucuses that like are directly relevant to the issue areas. Like for immigration, it'll be like judiciary and homeland security, right? So who works in there, right? But for the
They're not going to say
Chilean,
judiciary. Come on, man. They're not. You're giving Americans too much credit, man. They're not going to say judiciary. They can't even say that
I
word.
like, how many people do you need to know?
Yeah.
To know American
But
politics.
that's why I think America is like
in Chilean politics, it's a shitload of people. Like it's so many people because it's so many political parties, and it's just it's amazing. A multi-party system. If there's two things that the United States could do, right, that would like totally clean out all the lobbyists out of the Capitol and let lawmakers do their job without having to spend all day on the phone, it would be publicly funding elections. Like the only money that gets spent is the money that American people agree to on elections. So these guys can spend their whole day writing laws, right?
Right.
And two would be 50 political parties that have to form a coalition every election and around one person or 5 people or 8 people or 10 people, you know what I mean? Instead of 2 political parties squaring off in their own clusterfuck of a primary system, right?
Yeah.
Huge, like,
and I'd add ranked choice voting to that too, right? Ranked choice voting. Like, who's your number 1 pick? Okay, who's your second pick? Right now, I mean, politics is so dumbed down, which is why you get a dumb government, right? If it's just red or blue, there's a lot of things going on that you need to discuss in this country, and red or blue is not sufficient enough to settle that debate.
No, it's just it makes it so simple, right? That it makes it enduring, right? It's like, you know what I mean? Like it endures in its simplicity, like socialism or like the socialism of Allende, the socialism of the rest of the developed world, if you will, right? When it comes to funding or financing like the public pocket, right? For helping people basically who are poorer than you, right?
Right.
Is outside the spectrum of a two-party system and impossible to arrive at a two-party system, right?
Which I
Because
always
there's
thought it
no
was weird that like in
coalition that can
America
be
you
built,
can't
right? And it's not. When I say socialism, I'm just talking about like this element of like what is from Chile, right? That I know
labor
politically,
rights, like a labor
and
party.
right. It's just it can't happen because like the Republicans and the Democrats are both going to reject certain proposals. Like say right now, a great example last week, the billionaire tax, right? Of course, Republicans are going to reject any. They're only going to give billionaires tax cuts, right? They're
No,
not going
what
to
it is,
charge
I think what
billionaires
it is,
anything.
the two-party
And
system.
Democrats now are kind of doing the same thing, but they have to message it differently.
Yeah.
In a two-party system, you can have that conversation and isolate out all other viewpoints. In a coalition where 20 political parties are going to square off against 35 and see who can get the most voters, right?
Right, exactly.
And coalesce around a candidate. I don't know. I think it's a lot more dynamic. It's more of a clusterfuck at the beginning, but it's a more representative example of who actually the people want to lead them at the end of the process.
The problem with the two-party system is that, like, and you see with the Republicans and Democrats every day, every week, they have this base, right? Nominally, right, Republicans are on the right wing, conservative. Democrats are on the left wing, liberal, and so they say that's our base, and so they just fight over the middle. They're just fighting over the middle, but like in a multi-party
and the middle
system,
shifts. The middle keeps shifting right.
Right, the Overton window, right? But if you had multiple parties, there would be a centrist party, and there would be parties all along that spectrum. So it's not about trying to gain followers on your left or right. It's all about, okay, this is what we believe in. This is what we want to do. What other parties are with us? That would be a way better method of governing, man.
I agree. Public financing and many political parties, and the things can be shaken up accordingly, right? Because right now the status quo is that like this past week, whether you're a Republican or Democrat, right? Unless you have a lobbyist working for you, the question is like, who are these thousands of people being escorted through the Capitol on Wednesday? Like Wednesday, I had never seen on Wednesday the Build Back Better, for historical reference, the Build Back Better Act was being negotiated on Wednesday between moderate Democrats and progressive Democrats. A huge fucking spending bill, right? And tandem with a huge spending bill on infrastructure, right? So you got $4 trillion in play on Wednesday. And on Wednesday, I had never seen so many lobbyists in the Capitol, man. Like ever. It was like, wow, it is a massive building. The Capitol is like massive, right? It's a network of tunnels and meeting rooms and stuff like that. And everywhere I went was packed. And everyone, because of COVID restrictions, because of security measures, like the only way lobbyists can come into the Capitol is with an official appointment. And then because of COVID restrictions, they have to be escorted by a staffer, right? And the staffer, as I understand it from a conversation I overheard between a Capitol Hill policeman and a Mitch McConnell staffer, like the minority leader staffer, was that it can't be an intern. The staffer can't be an intern, right? So all everywhere is like, you remember like ducks, right? A mother duck and a bunch of ducklings. Well, the mother duck is like the 20-something tour guide for her lobbyist ducklings who are just kind of it's like the government affairs representative for a company is with the CEO, and the CEO's like core team of 3 or 4 people, like whatever they bring along with them, like their entourage, right? And they're being guided in many ways single file, because you're a reporter, you're talking to the senator. These lobbyists aren't going to jump out of like their line and be like, yo, senator, unless they actually know them, right? And actually, but the lanes in which that could be done comfortably without coming in close proximity to a bunch of people who are neither lobbyists, lawmakers, nor staff, they vanished. I mean, every escalator, every elevator, every hallway, everywhere was like people had these official appointment badges being escorted by somebody much, much younger than they around the Capitol. And none of them, to my knowledge, were immigrant lobbyists that I saw. Nobody, I mean, with one exception, the Indian Backlog Group Improved the Dream. Right. They're not lobbyists. They're just kids. One's like a group founded by a pharmacist, right? But somehow, I don't know exactly how they got a name. I suspect I know how they got the name, but they got a drop by Dick Durbin. the Senate Majority Whip. And the next thing you know, Dick Durbin is telling me after his floor, because he must have been going to his floor speech from when he met them, because I caught him after the floor speech. So I'm like, hey, I just saw you met with these guys, right? Deep Patel, my man, just met with Dick Durbin. Are you kidding me? How did they get to Dick Durbin before I did? I work here, and you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And next thing I know, I'm asking Dick Durbin, hey, I just saw you met with Improve the Dream, the advocacy org of Indian youth you just met. Yeah. So are you thinking about including green card backlog provisions? And does, is that going to be a pitch to the parliamentarian? Then I didn't say it, but what I was basically asking is the Indian green card backlog plan D,
Plan D.
Yeah, right. But not to get technical here, but for the Indian backlog community that might be watching this broadcast, right? Plan D in Mabel and backlog terms might go through what's called the privilege scrub and forego a formal pitch to the parliamentarian directly and be evaluated by the parliamentarian as part of the larger bill. The privileged scrub is the term to set your Google alerts for. I think that privileged scrub is going to be one of the most amazing Google alerts you're ever going to set, because the other meaning of privileged scrub is some dickhead who has a ton of money and sucks, right? A exactly. Privileged scrub.
It's like somebody.
But in the Senate procedure sense, and as much as it relates to budget reconciliation and the Indian visa backlog, Indian green card backlog community, green card, not visa.
You're gonna have to get a tattoo.
I got Shades on Twitter. I think he was the one who told me. Shades, I got you. The Indian green card backlog community, and as much as it relates to them, the question I'm looking to answer when the Senate returns from recess is whether the green card backlog is not. I'm going to ask if they're going to the parliamentarian, implying that it's going through the parliamentarian as a direct route, uniquely in the pitches to her, right? But if it's going to the privileged scrub, the final pitch to the parliamentarian where she evaluates a bill of thousands of pages, right? I think right now it's at like 2,000. It was at 1,700. I think it's a lot to read, right? So I don't know what that process looks like. All these talks of like, oh, we're going to vote on it today, we're going to vote on it tomorrow. It's just sort of like, if she took a month to get back to us about parole, what process? What is this privileged scrub where what does she take a day and read? There's one proposal. I don't know how long the proposal is because the text of the proposal is never leaked, right? Or has never come out. But if she, and they won't say if it's a presentation or something that they email to her, right?
Right.
But the question becomes like, if this 20-page proposal or whatever, like just to assign it a number, took a month, how long will it take to privilege scrub, say, a 2,000-page bill, something that is literally 100 times longer, Right. So 100 months, probably not. So if there is safety in being this low-key advocacy community right now within the policy debate, right? Not low-key enough to avoid Senator Haggerty promising to object on the germaneness of the green card backlog if it somehow reaches the floor without the privilege scrub. But there is a safety to have flown as one of these birds that nests on a cliff under the condor because it's not enough food for the condor to worry about.
Exactly.
But no other bird is going to try and prey on it because the condor eats those birds that prey on it. That's sort of like what the Indian green card backlog community has been able to do with the undocumented community, taking the advocacy spotlight and also the liability of the advocacy spotlight, and just kind of floating along as a piece of this immigration discussion that was actually put into text in the Rules Committee draft that came out, I think. Oh my God, I'm losing track of the days. It was either late last week or early this week, the first Rules Committee text before the second. It still survives, right? And so if it doesn't have to go to the parliamentarian as this unique pitch that all the news media covers, and some insiders say is just like immigration was kind of used as the battering ram. Let's see what the parliamentarian's going to say about this big social spending package. We'll use immigrants as like the knocker for the knuckles that knock the door for the rest of the party. But within the Indian green card backlog community, by talking to reporters like me, by talking to some of the other reporters they talk to a lot of the time, by identifying people like really low key, incredibly important stakeholders in this, like Zoe Lofgren and Raja Krishnamurthy, two congresspeople in the Democratic caucus who, working together, just the two of them could probably see this through to the end of the vote in the House on BBB. I don't see any way Stephanie Murphy, Gottheimer, these moderates are just going to jump in and be like, hold on a second. These legal immigrants don't deserve to be legal immigrants.
That's the other thing I've learned about you just in the
right?
past month of working with you. You're a great mimic. Speaking of, I mean, and we don't have to go to that specific story, but hey, do you want to tell people real quick about your past job? You had an interesting photography job.
Oh, yeah. So one of my first jobs out of college was I worked at a PR firm, and the PR firm like had clients all over the world, and some of these clients worked in like the energy sector. Some of these clients worked in like the nation, sort of like the diplomatic sector, whatever. But I was a campaign photographer for Barack Obama's campaign for president in 2008. So I'd really learned how to use a camera. And on my first day on the job,
what was that like? I mean, we got to, 2008, we didn't know he was going to be president, but like he was a rock star, right?
He was a total rock star, and I'd never heard of him. Actually, I was like, when I got out of college, I called a friend who was I knew like had studied political science with me or whatever, and he had gotten a job with Hillary Clinton, and I asked him, I was like, hey, can I get a job with Hillary Clinton? I speak Spanish. I love to like mobilize Latinos. He's like, oh, we don't really need that right now. And then he called me back like a week and a half later. This is like sort of like it was an intro job in politics, but he's just like, hey, actually, there's this other candidate. He's kind of a long shot, like senator from Illinois. But he needs.
I'm from Illinois, so
he needs Latino outreach.
Like 2004.
And I was like, sure, I definitely want to like get out of my parents' basement and find a job with my political science degree. Let's go and campaign for who again? His name's Barack Obama. I'm like, okay, Barack Obama, and
no chance, right?
He's like, and he's a black candidate, and I was just like, from Illinois. Okay, so this could hold me over for a couple months, right? Is what I thought at the time. Yeah. But as soon as I joined the campaign, like I was basically on a bus to Indianapolis for like training before I knew anything really about Barack Obama. I just needed a job, right? And then I heard him speak, and then I realized my job was like to go into immigrant communities, right, and convince them to vote for him and register to vote for him, and then make sure that they go to the polls, right? So you're registering voters up until the deadline. Then you're messaging to voters about the amnesty that Obama is going to bring them up until voting election day, up to a few weeks before election day, what is called GOTV, or get out to vote. And then you're making sure everyone has a ride to the polls, right? Everyone has a ride to the polls, and like, no one is left. No one who is registered to vote doesn't have the opportunity to vote, right? So it's this big job that involves one core promise, like amnesty, like a immigration amnesty, right? And in the sort of the dust of the campaign trail, right before I left for the campaign trail, my father gave me his camera, which was like a old DSLR, like 6 megapixel. I don't know what it was, but it was with a long lens. I photographed Latinos for Obama. My photographs of Latinos for Obama are to this day the best photographs of Latinos for Obama I've ever seen on the internet. Like they're fucking. You
got to show me them. I haven't seen them.
They're fucking stunning.
I probably have seen them. But
the Puerto Rican Day Parade in East Chicago, Indiana, which is Mabel. Stop it. In the Puerto Rican Day Parade in East Chicago, Indiana, in the summer of 2008, was my first truly great album as a campaign photographer for Barack Obama, because the Puerto Ricans of East Chicago, which is just across the border in Indiana from the Chicago we all know and love in Illinois, right? They came out. A man was shot in the stomach and bled to death, right? But there was dancing and music and fun and floats and all these other things, right? Like it
What
was
a
just
sentence, man! A man was shot in the stomach and bled to death,
well,
but there was music
sorry,
and dancing.
that's the journalist in me. It's like, well, what's the headline to this story? It's like,
Yeah,
well, a
right.
man was shot to death in the stomach.
You don't
Like
want to
it was
bury the
like
lead,
right
right?
after we passed through with the Obama campaign, something transpired, and then like a couple days later, we read in the Northwest Indiana Times that a man had been shot in the stomach at the corner of an intersection where we walked through with the Obama campaign float, right? And which was like a bunch of local elected officials that we sort of wrangled from the Latino community to like walk along this Puerto Rican Day parade and dance and sing and shake hands and basically glad hands with the Puerto Rican community in this excerpt of Gary, Indiana, the murder capital of America, right? So the photography that I took that day was Puerto Rican community, subaltern, in it to win it for Obama, like in it to win it for. I think I got like 2 or 3 Mexicans because they all had Puerto Rican flags because of Puerto Rican Day Parade, and some Mexicans showed up with Mexican flags, which is cool. Everybody was down, right?
Right.
But the album reflects like these people were in it to win it, and our only message was relief for the undocumented, like we call them illegal immigrants, the illegal immigrant community at the time, right? No one had talked about the semantics of word changes and stuff like that, like how to,
Right.
So, but the Puerto Ricans were down. They were like, yeah, this is great. Like we wanted Hillary, we got Obama. This is something that we're cool with. Like we're in it to vote for him, right? And that's what the photos reflect. So anyway, like I get to DC after the Obama campaign looking for a job, can't find a job. I'm bartending for like a year, waiting tables, washing dishes for like a year. I'm like, what am I, like 25 years old maybe? Mabel, stop it. And I'm bartending at a bar, washing dishes at a bar across the street from the Capitol, where I now cover immigration, with a bunch of immigrants, boss boys, dishwashers, right? Like, and Georgetown grad students looking for a couple, like, immigrant Georgetown grad students looking for like a way to make some night money, like slanging hamburgers, right? At interns from the Hill. It was really cool because like some of these, like, they were mostly women, right? And they would come in and they would be 20 something undergrad or grad students at Georgetown or George Washington or one of the universities around, and they'd have to serve burgers to their classmates who were interns in the Capitol, right? And I said, there's no way I'm working for free. That was one thing, like the line I drew in the sand when I came into Washington was just like, I'm never working for free. And the only internships I'm hearing about are unpaid. What the fuck am I going to do for rent if they're not paying me to go work full time, right?
Yep.
And they're like, no, but it could lead to a job. It's like, what, are they going to hire me when I'm homeless? You know what I mean? So anyway, like, you know what I mean? So I get this job at the bar. I start networking, right? And a funny early and also a key moment in my like early Washington life was I tweeted, Ariana Huffington joined Twitter. Her second tweet was at me because I have been bugging her about letting me blog for the Huffington Post forever, right? And I'm like, you should have me fucking blog for the Huffington Post.
How'd
whatever
you know
I said
her?
on Twitter. I knew her from TV or the internet or whatever. I never actually met her, right? And she's like, I'll put you in touch with my editor, And so that was back when I was on the Obama campaign. But I had a Huffington Post blog when I came to Washington, and I would write about immigrant stuff, just immigrants. Like you can remember it's like immigrant stuff. So it's like the Raul Grijalva hosting a Arizona delegation talking about the terrors of ICE in their community, and his natural resources subcommittee was something I think I covered at one point, And finally, I got the attention of a PR firm downtown, right? And this downtown PR firm paid me, I think, $55,000 a year, which was like, to me, like, oh my God, I was literally making some nights like $50 on an 8-hour shift, right? Every once in a while, I'm like knocking it out of the park, getting like $200, $300, $400, $500.
I was a server myself, and so sometimes I would just have enough to, eat lunch or eat dinner, and that was it, and then I would waste it all at the bar, a couple drinks, and then go home broke.
That's the thing about the service industry life, man. Like, it is in the I guess in the drug dealing world, you don't get high on your own supply. A lot of people in the service industry, I too fell into the cycle as well many times of just like when college and high school, when I would like work at restaurants, just like after work getting fucked up at work, right?
Yeah.
But this job let out, was the last place that let out like 3-4 in the morning, right? So, and yeah, sure, we would get fucked up while we were closing. I would have like a couple shots, maybe like a couple beers, like, you know what I mean? Like maybe even smoke a couple
It's
joints.
a fucking hard job, man. High
Dude, it's
stress, fast.
super
I mean, you
hard.
need a fucking drink or something harder than that after your shift's done.
But it was also a place that had a lot of power because like Congress people, their staffers, like entire caucuses, delegations from all over the world and all over the country advocating for a piece of the Obamacare negotiations back in 2010 were coming through my bar. It was an establishment bar that had been opened in 1968 by a Georgetown judge named Stuart Long called the Hawk and Dove. Next door was the Tune In. And over the course of like, I don't know, 9, 10, 12 months, I had, you know, a waiter shift at the Hawk and Dove, like in a weekly I had like 5-6 waiter shifts between the two of them, a dishwasher shift here and there, and like a bar shift. I was sort of like, you know, moving in on some of the better shifts that, you know, some of these some people who work at the Hawk and Dove forever had like, you know, had. But that's not what I went to college for. That's not what I came to Washington to do. Like what I came to Washington to do was to be a reporter, right? From the day I got here, that was always my goal. I was like, I'm gonna be like my Uncle Bart, right? And I'm gonna be the best. He was the fastest reporter in this town, and he's from Missouri. I'm gonna be the next Mark Twain because he's from Missouri, right? Because it was just sort of like, you know, and that was always the goal. That was always the goal. But it was like, you know, when this PR firm called me, it was like, I'll pay you $55,000 a year. Sure, there were some people at the time who were like, dude, that means you'll never be a reporter because you work in like a PR firm, right? Like, or like in Washington, it's like a lobbying firm, right? Like, and my thought was just like, well, I have a Huffington Post blog and no one else covers immigration. Why can't I just keep writing about immigration? So I asked my boss, do you care if I write listicles about immigration? Latino reporters who are excellent write about just the kind of different shit that we do, right? Like as immigrants in Washington on the policy and political space, like try and elevate like Latinos as much as I can. He was just like, sure, right, do whatever you want as long as you keep taking those good pictures.
Yeah, because you're just a photographer. I mean, what is it? What do they care about your fucking politics?
Right, photographer. I mean, I just like that was the first time that PR firm was the first time I learned how to write talking points. Like I learned how to write talking points. I learned how to like write a proposal for new work, right? And I probably was there maybe like a year and a half. I was probably there, I would say maybe like 2 years, right? At this PR firm. And I learned a ton about Washington and about how sort of like the lobbying world works, right? Like how money buys operatives who deliver, who are, you know, who and what they're expected to deliver and how these things are negotiated and what they charge, right, for this delivery and what are the high level deliverables and stuff like that. Because of this skill that I had on the Obama campaign, when I brought it to the PR firm, it made me a fly on the wall, right? I was always something that you could add to your contract. Like we will provide audio, visual, whatever, right? Like, you know, we'll film and shoot your whatever. And some of these clients would be like, well, you know, we're going to host the Pan-African like soccer tournament, right? With every country in Africa. Or we're going to, was another one, like, we're going to have a film screening of, the client was HBO. It was like, we're going to have a film screening at the Pentagon for like the Joint Chiefs of our latest HBO documentary about PTSD, right? So that was like, you know, kind of close to home. But yeah, I got to travel the world, and I got to know every agency that we worked with, like on some level. Like it was like, okay, we have a client that's like, I can't even remember like what the specific things were, because when you're like the photographer, but you also know how to tweet, like you could write a tweet for them, whatever, and send it up the chain. And usually, like you know, whatever actually comes out, you'll see. Like if you even follow up, like was it something you wrote, or something got completely changed? It's in the PR world, as you probably know, like the shit you have to send a client, right, is often just options for a principal, right? And when you have a workhorse like me, bro, I could give you a billion options for a principal. Are you fucking kidding me? Like, what do you need from me, right? But the thing that I love to do, and the thing that allowed me to like really, really crushed the Washington scene was photography, right? Um, which is odd because I haven't shot a photo off stuff from my phone in probably like, 8, 9 years now, right? But for like a 2 year time period, I got super into it for $55,000 a year. And that to me was just the shit, right? And then from there till now, fuck, man, I've probably worked in like 15 jobs, dude, from like
You were in
maybe
California as a journalist.
15, even 20. Yeah. That's the thing. Like, I did not arrive in reporting in a conventional way, but I am very, very much a Washingtonian
I was
at
gonna
this
say, I
point.
mean, you everything
So
you've as we've gone through this conversation, from the time you were born, you've kind of been bred and been training to be a political reporter, right?
yeah, I mean, that's what I've always wanted to do. That's what I've always said I was gonna do. And for 13 years, I did other shit, saying like, this is what I
What I'm
need
not,
to
no,
do
I
to
don't.
survive.
I mean, it's
But the pandemic,
being a photographer, like you said, showed you, it's taught you things that a reporter, somebody coming straight out of J school, wouldn't have gotten, right?
yeah, and you're watching the reporters, you're like, dude, that's the job I would love to do in this fucking town. And every time you're pitching a reporter, like I've probably sent 10,000 pitches to reporters in my fucking time in Washington, right? And on the other side of that email was always somebody whose job I would rather have than fucking pitching you. I would just go write the story myself. Are you fucking serious? I know way more about this than they do most of the time if I'm pitching them, right? Like there are some pitches you have to send that are total bullshit. You don't even care about at all.
Yeah.
But most of the time, right? Like if I'm reaching out to like, something or someone, like I'm invested in it in a way that my like expertise is legit and relevant, right? So on the other side of that was always like a working media professional in journalism who I was in some level very jealous of, right? Like very pissed that
Why the fuck am I not in your position, right?
yeah, and the kind of things that would piss me off over the years, you see reporters tweeting, it's just like, oh my God, it's so late. My job is so hard. And you're thinking to yourself, motherfucker, I'm washing dishes with another Dame degree, right? And I would fucking destroy you on this beat if I got the fucking opportunity to walk into that building and ask congressman questions. Right?
But that's exactly why you're fucking Pablo Reports at fucking killing it on Capitol Hill now, right? Because you've been through that, bro. You've been through that. Like that's why you got balls of steel now, because there's one you have nothing to lose. Two, you're on the cusp of becoming greater than you've ever even imagined, right? You want to be a political reporter, you might go down in history as one of the greatest, like especially in immigration, right? Latino reporters in DC. I mean, it's because of that fire, right? It's because of, I mean, that's why I love this fucking that's why I like talking to people. That's why I like bringing people on, because it's like, dude, it's almost destined, bro. And it's either you rise to it, you either chase it, or you don't. But you're like, I mean, what, you just turned 37. So
38.
You're 38. I'm about to turn 37 on the 24th. I'm about to turn 37.
Happy
we're
birthday.
young. I mean, we're old, right? After 35, I said, my wife's about to turn 35 next year. I'm like, they're not going to care about you anymore. The demographic is 18 to 35, right? So nobody cares what we buy, eat, watch. But and I know, like, late 30s is still young, man, right? Like, especially what has happened in the past 5 years in your life. What's going to happen in the next 5 years? What's going to happen in the next 10? So, like, I mean, for me, like, am I where I thought I would be at this age? No. I thought I had big dreams, and I thought it was going to be easier to get there. But I'm also in a place that I never thought I would be, right? I never thought I would be where I am. And so, like, who else in our age group is doing what you do, right? All these old heads, when they die, they have a heart attack, a stroke, whatever, they're out of the way. We're the next fucking generation. And all you got is, and I tell my wife this too, because she's in a different industry. She's in business. Are you intimidated by anybody in your age group? I don't think so, but just from what I know about you. So, like, that's going to be your competition in like 5-10 years, right? and you're that dude now. So like, what are you going to be in 5 years, 10 years, right? Like, you're going to be, and again, I don't believe in manifesting or any of that shit, but I do believe in like, you know what the fuck you want to be and what you want to do, and you chase it and you make it happen. I don't believe in manifesting or any of that fucking. I got my daughter of 17. She has gems all over her fucking car. Like, this gem is for this. She's like, there's a gem underneath your seat. I'm like, what is that for? She's like, bad energy. I'm like, all right. I'm like, but it's a rock.
It's a thing. It's a thing. It's a thing.
And somebody look at your life. Look at everybody who just heard you on the podcast or watching on YouTube, saw that you had this dream and you didn't know how to go about it. You just kept making decisions that stepped, even when they look like detours. Like you said, the photography, you're talking about the photography being a detour. It's not, right? I mean, again, like you said, you know about lobbying now, you know about how that works. And if you what's more important, what's a better understanding to have in being a DC correspondent than knowing how lobbies work?
Yeah.
Right? So now when you see those lobbyists going through the halls of Capitol Hill on Wednesday, you know exactly who the fuck those people are and what they're about and how they operate.
I mean, I do. And I know the habits of the people who run the place, like where they go, where they walk, how they get to one place to another in the public hallways, not the public hallways, but the hallways with that are accessible to press. Look, I think that like the road ahead is like incredible. Like I was saying before, I don't know if I made the point well, but like the immigrant audience for immigrant policy and politics reporting, right, is in the hundreds of millions of people. You know, I mean, it's not just the immigrants themselves.
And like we said, billions. When you got Indians.
Yeah. Immigrants is something that's just like, at least in Washington, there are some like a couple like dedicated reporters who do really great work, right? But it hasn't been a thing till we made it a thing. And now it's becoming a thing. The LA Times is hiring an immigration reporter, and the New York Times, I'm sure, will follow suit. The Washington Post is probably gonna have to put somebody up on Capitol Hill to chase me and us and what we've created, right? Like that's the thing. At the end of the day, the road ahead is fraught. Like journalism is a very jealous industry, right? And we are fucking crushing it, and they're gonna continue to crush it, right? Like that's the thing. We're gonna keep doing this better and better and better.
Yeah.
And if we make mistakes along the way, we'll own them 100%, you know, but if we don't, fuck you. Like, here's the deal. We're journalists here to ask questions on a beat that has been neglected. We know it's been neglected because we follow it very closely as a Latino community. We're finding other communities like the Indian backlog community that follows it very closely as an immigrant community. And it's underserved at the end of the day, right? So everybody is going to start trying to do what we do. And all I can say is, A, welcome to
where
the
you
game.
Been?
B, bring it, right? If you can be a better immigration reporter than me in this town, my town, right? Hats off to you, right? Like I'm saying, like if that's something that you aspire to, right? You should apply to the job at the LA Times. You should ask the new executive editor of the Washington Post when they're going to hire somebody to chase me in the Capitol. You should ask Politico when they're going to separate their labor beat from their immigration beat and have dedicated immigration reporters who can chase me around the Capitol. Although I will say this, the reporter who always scoops me from Politico's team, again, hats off to Marianne Levine. Like she actually broke the stories of the parliamentarian, I think both times, man. And I was following it like a hawk. She actually got the story. So well done, Politico, on that one. But overall, right? Everybody else is chasing me while I guess chase Marianne's stories about the parliamentarian. But you know, there's everybody's chasing the immigration beat on relief, right? And the relief it's something that immigrants really care about, you know? So I hope that this is something that more competition comes into the Capitol, more competition goes downtown to the White House, because, you know, it's not just immigration is not just DHS. Immigration is not just the Hispanic caucus, right? Like an immigration reporter should be allowed to go to and does now go to Nancy Pelosi's press conference.
Oh, those videos are beautiful.
And get questions every week. And, you know, nobody's ever asked me, but they should. Like, how is it that I always get a question every week at Nancy Pelosi? It's easy to think it was like, well, I'm tall, loud, and whatever. That is part of it, right? But watch Jorge Ramos. Like, I'm a student of Jorge Ramos, right? I am a student of Chad Pergram from Fox News, who
he just
also
retired, right?
always gets a question.
He's retiring.
Yeah, which is it's tragic. But these are the best in the press conference game, right? Like, so anyway, like, long story short, more immigration reporting is better. We've set the standard. We appreciate so much the audience. The road ahead is fraught because the audience, people do get jealous in this game. And the bigger we get is in influencing policy through our reporting, right? Which is inevitable. When you ask a question, it creates a feedback loop where a lot of people follow up on whatever the question the boss got asked by a reporter was. I know that from having worked in PR forever. And when I ask questions, I'm very conscious of that. So if you're a comms director watching this or some Hill staffer, no, I've never worked on the Hill per se, but I did work at the DNC. I understand political campaigns. I did work for Obama. I worked for like a lot of different places along the way.
Right.
I sympathize that the amount of work I am putting on your plate in something that you're not used to giving a fuck about, right? Like, can probably create headaches and is probably a pain in the ass. But at the end of the day, sympathize with me as the immigrant covering immigration that's kind of the role in the Capitol, right? Like, that's my audience now is immigrants. Like, I am an immigrant. We are an immigrant community. So it's like, sympathize with that too, right? And give me an answer. That's a great part of journalism, right?
That's a great role of journalism. An important role of journalism is to make leaders care about things that they're not caring about. And because as a press, you're there representing the public. You're there representing the readers, right? Hey, this is what our readers want to know. Pablo's not asking Nancy Pelosi Pablo's questions. You're asking the readers' questions, right?
They're informing it along the way. It's like, like the last question I asked Nancy Pelosi just on Thursday, like, does the parliamentarians passed as a likely immigrant deporter inhibit her does it create a bias at the end of the day? Are you concerned that there's a bias that an immigrant deporter is evaluating immigrant relief proposals to an immigrant? Yeah, that's a big concern, right? Are you serious?
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? But in the world of the Capitol, if we weren't there, it's not. It simply is not. The person who decides the fate of tens of millions of stakeholders, right? Both immigrants and their loved ones, their communities, their economies, everything, right, is an unelected 101st member of the United States Senate who likely helped deport immigrants for a living in the late 1990s.
Right. And that would have, you and I know that, but it seemed like that was going to go unnoted by the rest of the media landscape or whatever. But, we've talked enough. Obviously, I'm going to have you back on. There's plenty to talk about, right? Pablo, thank you so much. I'm going to go get brunch, but let everybody know where they can follow you on social media.
Pablo reports on Twitter.
Yeah, he's
where the action
phenomenal.
Goes down.
I was just reading this.
Twitter.
I was waiting for you to come on, and I was going through your Twitter feed. Just going through Pablo's Twitter feed is great, and everything you write for Latino Rebels is great. It's an honor to be your fucking editor, and
it's an honor to be edited by you, Hector.
Yeah, well.
You make my reporting so much better. If the audience could see the text I send you versus like what actually gets published as, it's all accurate, right? It's all within the frame, but like the writing is so much. My writing is not as good as what you read. Let me put it that way.
I got to come out to, I am coming out to Washington. At earliest, I think is probably the spring. But I'm going out there to see what you do up close, just to see it personally, right? Not as your fucking editor, really just to see it, right? And two, to fucking take you out for a drink and a nice steak or something like that and fucking have more conversations, man. But thank you so much for coming on, and I'll talk to you probably tomorrow, right?
Yeah, right.
Or later today.
Right. Yeah.
Take it easy, bro.
Yep,
Peace.
Later.